Welcome to this very special edition of The Author's Voice with KAJ, a show where we explore the stories behind the stories. Here we dive into the worlds created by authors, discover their inspirations, and ensure that you walk away enriched and inspired. And today we have with us author John Hamilton, born into a lively Irish American family of singers and storytellers, broke from a strict Catholic upbringing to pursue music, immersed in the world of rock club, drugs and alcohol, and derailed by panic disorder. A lot of things we'll learn directly from him, but we'll be talking about his book today, Honest to God, which explores faith's collapse and his spiritual journey. Welcome to the show, John.
Thanks so much. I appreciate it. And it's good to be back. It's good to be back.
You are welcome. Welcome to the show once again. Yes, it's good to have you back on the show. And this is not just the second time. There will be many more time because a new book is coming up that will come up next year. The Weight of Snow in next year. Yes. But this time, we will be talking about Honest to God. We'll talk about this book. So we'll come to that first. So, John, but before that, I read about you, I talked about you. Let's hear it from you itself, your journey, your background, a bit of that. And coming to the writing part, how did that happen? Gradually or sudden?
Great question. The writing part actually came to me through a couple of different channels. One was sort of self-exploration. I had always been a writer in some form or fashion. I had, as a songwriter when I first started out in music. I worked in advertising as a copywriter. As a pastor, one of your jobs is being a writer. You're producing a sermon every week. Literally thousands and thousands of words over the course of a year. So I sort of had that in my DNA. And when I was getting ready to leave a certain parish that I had a wonderful ministry at, or at least I perceived it as a wonderful ministry, it was a great congregation. I wanted to sort of take account of how I had changed over the course of those 15 years and put that down on paper, because my ideas going in were not the same as my ideas going out, and I wanted to figure out how that had changed. I was fortunate enough to get into a writing group here in the Boston, Massachusetts area called Grub Street, which has now grown leaps and bounds, is sort of internationally recognized as a kind of a hotbed of great young talent. I was not one of the great young talents at that time, but I worked for a year with a small group there and was able to produce a draft, which I can kind of chipped away at for probably this will make some people's heart stop in their chest probably, for about 7 or 8 years before I was fortunate enough to reconnect with a woman that I had started ministry with. She had been in my same entering ordination time, and she was an acquisitions editor at a publishing company. And I sent her off a copy of the book or the draft, and she read it, liked it. She said, "I think we just need to make a few changes." Whenever you hear an editor say we're going to make a few changes, always tuck yourself in for a ride, because those won't be a few changes. There'll be many, many changes. But her instincts were spot on, and so we worked for a couple of years doing those edits. So all in all, it was close to a 10-year process to get from the beginning, when I first put pen to paper in that memoir. What was called the memoir incubator class, to when the book was finally published. So it was a long process, and fortunately had a happy ending.
And finally, you had this book.
Yes, finally that's a great day when that arrives in the mail. I think that in that box of books. Finally shows up at your door, and you open that box of books and see that for the first time. There are a few moments in life that that compare with that. It's a wonderful feeling.
Absolutely, absolutely wonderful feeling. And inside the box, there were the books, and within the books, there was the story. What was the story of Honest to God? Why this title, Honest to God?
The title was that I wanted to be, or the title came from that I wanted to be as honest as I could about my search for God, which was many times encountered doubt, and I wanted to be able to put that into this book. When you're a pastor, um, getting up into the pulpit and saying that you have doubts or that you have trouble believing certain things, or that you know cannot connect with God in some sort of way, that's not something you want to be telling the congregation at large. Maybe in smaller groups or among close associates, you might mention that, but that's your role is to encourage people, is to bring people to a place where they can have a spiritual experience. So I went through this, sort of a dark night of the soul as I was finishing up this pastorate, and wanted to be able to put that down on paper so that people could see that it was, well, a couple of things. It's okay to doubt. It's okay. That is part of the journey. It's part of the process of belief, that we don't, or many of us don't wake up every day and have an absolute certainty of our position in the universe, that we are confused. We have things that we're still trying to work through. We have things we have difficulty believing. And I wanted people to know that even a pastor would have these feelings, and that was okay. That was, it was okay to go through those type of things. Many of the great sort of mystical traditions, and by mystical I don't mean woo-woo mystical. I mean mystical in the sense of people like Thomas Merton, people like Simone Weil. Those people who are considered paragons of faith, they had those doubts as well too. And I think it was important to see that an average guy, an average pastor, could experience that as well too. So I think I wanted that to bring that to people who knew me, and to show that was okay. That was that was part of the journey.
Absolutely, absolutely. So when you talk about doubts, are they a good thing? Are they not so good thing to understand? Either faith or a life. How do you want people to understand your point of view, John?
I think that the way that our rational minds are always in, well, hopefully not always, but our rational minds are many times not in sync with our spiritual or emotional minds. So we see, and I think that this is one of the areas of the book that I really like people to bring home to people. We live, at least where I live, which is in the eastern part of the United States, and this would be true, I think, of the Midwest part of the United States, or at least a certain part of that. We live in a very, very secular culture. We're really sort of cut off from spirituality, and churches are dying where I live. In fact, one of the things I'm going to be doing next month is helping to close the little church in my town, which is sort of a sad thing to have to do. It's just the church doesn't have the number of congregants it needs to continue going, and to maintain a church building costs a lot of money. So the church has made I think, very brave decision to close the church. We have that coming at us, from one hand. We have the secular culture coming at us from one hand. We have social media on the other hand, which is, I think, also has crept into a spot where has filled up that void that uh, could have been used or should be used for perhaps maybe more spiritual things. We're swiping on our phones all the time, which is it almost puts us into a trance, which I think is almost a religious state. This may sound strange, but it's not that far from a state of sort of what's called flow. Csikszentmihalyi's idea of flow, that sense that we do something and it comes, we feel our ego sort of slip away and we are very, very engaged in what we are doing. Um, that that's the commonality between a spiritual experience when you feel sort of completely wrapped up in a spiritual state of mind, at one with the universe, at one with God, however you interpret that. That happens when we're on our phones. We get into that same trance state. So there are many things that are at this particular time in this culture that are working against a being in a spiritual state of mind. And so you take that and you mix that all around with just natural doubt that you do have. You have a pretty potent mix of stuff you have to deal with, and stuff you have to be able to. When you're preaching, you have to be able to translate that. You have to become sort of a vehicle for people to see that you are experiencing those same things. You're not living off in I don't go home to some little monastery somewhere. I live in the world. I have to go shopping. I have to, drive my car. I have to do all of those things. I have to go onto Facebook to put, what we're doing here today is part of that. So all of those things were sort of mixed in there. But there's also a journey involved. There's a journey from being very young and your first conceptions of God, and what ultimately becomes a conception of God, which may even still change over the course of however many years I have left at this point.
Absolutely, John. Our life has to go on, and everything else is also necessary. Just like you talked of Facebook, we are also going live on Facebook. So right now, apart from the YouTube
Right.
channel, so everything is very important here. In terms of the book, coming to your book itself, John, you talk. Who is this book for? Is it for a particular group, only for religious people, non-religious people, general people? Who is this book for? What is it that you want them to understand through this book?
Another great question. There's probably it's funny, if I look on Amazon, it comes up it comes up very high on the rock band memoir, which I find kind of funny because that's really not where the where the focus of this is. Obviously, some pastors, that I know would be interested in it. This is written for anyone who views life as a journey, or anyone who has had to reinvent themselves. One of I think one of the primary themes in this book is that life throws you some curveballs and some pretty hard curveballs, and you have to make changes in your direction and then make meaning out of those changes in direction. And I think that in writing a memoir, you try to find what was the meaning of that thing that happened. What did that lead to? Because a memoir is not an autobiography. No one would want to write an autobiography of me. I mean, that's just, or I wouldn't. I mean, or biography. My life just is not that interesting. But to find a story within your life, I think that's something that people will recognize. And my fondest hope in doing this book is that people will find at some point in this book, uh, a situation or a decision that they have to make, and as they read that, they think, I've had that same situation happen, or a very, very similar situation happen to me, and I wonder how he went about dealing with this, and then maybe compare it to how they dealt with it. So that's the kind of reader that I would hope that this book would resonate with. The people who are meaning making of their lives. I mean, we try to make meaning out of our lives. We have these decision points in our lives. I had that decision point early on in the book where, because of the onset of panic disorder, I had to leave a career that was pretty much in full swing. I was, doing well as a musician, and all of a sudden developed this panic disorder and could not get back on stage. Uh, Came out of the clear blue. I had no idea that this was going to happen, and it put me in a position where I had to, in my early 30s, make a complete shift from what my goals had been, what my direction had been, all the hours of practicing I had put into to becoming a working musician. And I was a working musician. It wasn't like today where people, have to depend upon streaming and the pennies that they get from streaming. I was on the road playing with bands and making a decent middle class living, and I had to make a complete 180 at that point. So going through those transitions in life, I'm not that unusual with that. Many people have that. Something happens to them, a spouse dies, or an injury happens. So they have to make that complete 180 turn, and and then how do you make meaning out of that? And I think it's so important to be able to make meaning out of that. Otherwise, it just seems like life is nothing but a bunch of random events. And if our lives are just random events, then it's a much more uncertain world that we live in.
Absolutely, absolutely. It's much more than the things that we talk about or live in life. Is certainly not a bunch of random events. It's making a meaning. You are making that meaning in the form of the book. Not only this book, another book is coming. So I want to understand from you, John, is in terms of this book, any particular favorite lines, any particular thing, scene that you have in this book that you like it, or you think your readers will like it a lot?
Yeah, what I'd like to do is I'm going to read, if it's okay. I'd like
Yes,
to read
yes,
read
yes.
from almost the very beginning of the book, and this sort of sets the tone for a theme that becomes very, very important throughout the book, and that is the theme of transcendence. And let me define that word, transcendence. Transcendence is that feeling, that you can get this feeling anywhere. It doesn't have to happen in a religious context. If you uh, are with a good group of friends and you're having a great conversation, and you kind of forget yourself, your ego starts to slip away, and that could be one form of it. Another form could be a very powerful religious experience where you just feel completely absorbed. For me, the real hot button for that was always music, and it still is today. I mean, I still work at music in sort of a not full time, but I still do music and still release music on Spotify and other platforms. But music to me taught me originally the power of being able to transcend yourself, to find something beyond yourself. And I'll just read a little passage here
Yes.
About that happening when I was just a very young little guy, when I was probably 8 or 10 years old. So I'll read that and then maybe explain a little bit about it afterwards. Um, it says, this is right on the third page of the book. This is right out of the gate. Melody and rhythm were, physically, as much a part of me as my lungs or my hands or my eyes. As a kid, I watched my father, with his dark, rich baritone, sing at family parties, saw how he could bring a room full of raucous, ball in the beer drinking relatives first to silence and then to a place far, far away. Later, when I sang in the choir, the sound rolling in wave after wave of overtones throughout the sanctuary of Sacred Heart Church, I could feel myself floating up and disappearing into the arms of God. The good God, not the crazy, punishing God. In fact, music helped me escape the unhinged side of the bipolar God. When we finally got an old upright piano, I spent hours not just practicing, but dreaming in awe of the magic that could make what I heard in my head travel through the muscles and tendons and ligaments of my arms to the bones and the joints of my fingers, and then jump the chasm from me to the physical world, landing on the gray-white ivories of the keys, and from there to felt and steel and mahogany, ending in the vibration of sound. It seemed miraculous. Time disappeared. Often I disappeared so completely that when I came back, I wondered where I had been. So it's that feeling of being so absorbed in something that you forget where you are, who you are, and to me that is the basis of the religious impulse or the spiritual impulse. I think that all religions and all traditions, in their pure state, strive for that. That's the place where we can love from, the place that we can be compassionate from, because our ego has disappeared. So, yeah, so that was from when I was just I was very fortunate that I when I was very young, worked in a choir. Not worked in, I was part of a choir. I was just 8 or 10 years old, but the choir was a very good choir. This is just an accident of where I lived. It was just the church near where I lived. So when I was, by the time I was 12, this choir had worked with the Boston Symphony Orchestra on many occasions. And my first recording session, of all things, happened when I was 13 years old. I had a little solo part in a record that the Boston Symphony Orchestra had done, and in fact, I still have the vinyl of it downstairs somewhere. But those feelings, they all came together in music and God and that feeling of kind of that oceanic feeling of disappearing. I hope that makes
Absolutely.
sense.
Yes, yes, very much makes sense. And I'm just thinking about read. What you read. What is this book about transcendence, about everything, and also about uh, how challenging a book writing is can be. So I ask you this, John. What was the most challenging part of writing this particular book of yours?
But I'd say the most challenging part was to make sure first of all, make sure the folks knew what I was talking about in terms of this transcendence thing, to be able to put those parts into words. I spent a long time crafting those words so that people would be able to understand it, not as some sort of a impossible process for them to go through, that they could do it as well too. The sense of getting lost in something, I think, is something that people, just about everybody experiences, but they may not put that same label on it. But I hoped in writing this for them to be able to say, "Oh yeah, I can put that label on that experience. That's what was happening to me at that time." So to be able to for folks to understand that, and then to be able to take what had become as a very sort of once one comes out of seminary, you're filled with all the answers. You have, no matter, in fact, there's an examination you do at the end of, and in the Christian tradition that I was in, where you sit in a room and there are roughly, I don't know, 20 or 25 people there who get to ask you questions on all the subjects of Christianity. So it's sort of like the final exam, and it's and many of these questions deal with very, very complex items of doctrine, and things like, what is the definition of grace? What is all of these definitions? So you spend years studying all of this stuff to get all these definitions down. And then you realize once you get into a parish, most of these things don't matter, or the definitions of these things really don't matter. It's much more the sort of the compassion and the empathy that you can show somebody. It boils down to some very, very simple principles that that are able to move people to a place of comfort if they're in pain, can challenge them if they're complacent. So by the time I had left, my concept of God was much less defined. It was, I would say that it end up at the end of the book saying that I really believe that God is unknowable, and that is not. And I went to great care to make this point in the book. That is not atheism. That is simply my admission that I am a fragile human whose brain just cannot comprehend the immensity of what God is. We can try to make those put definitions on it, but it's like shooting arrows at the moon. You're never going to get it right. However, you do know sometimes deep inside that you are doing things right, and there's some sort of connection that happens there. And again, those things almost always fall around that idea of compassion and empathy and taking care of people. I think that one of the things that at least the churches in where I live, most of the churches do great work with food pantries and taking care of people who are homeless and that type of thing, which I call in the book the sort of backdoor ministries of the church. These are because the people come to the back door and they come into for food, or they come in for comfort or for warmth, and then the front door we have all of the shiny stuff and all of the the polished pews, and everything is in great shape, and that's fine. Now I have no problem with that, but I think that the heart of the ministry of the church is out that back door. Those are the people you really have to take care of, and those are the people I used to have a lot of fun with. That people who were happy just because you would take the time to have a conversation with them. That was such an easy thing for me to be able to give, but something that meant so much to somebody who did not have that in their lives. So.
Absolutely, John. So, in a nutshell, what do you want your readers of this particular book of yours to take away? What key insight message do you want readers to take away with themselves?
Well, I think something may have shifted in the culture since this book came out, which is kind of interesting. I hint at this book at the collapse of traditional Christianity, and by that I don't mean that Christianity is going away. Only that Christianity was in a kind of a sense of crisis near where I lived, and was trying to find a new way to be in the world. Since then, and I'm not going to go off in a political direction, we can see many other institutions around the world crumbling. Just 2 days ago, the Pope died. Is going to have a tremendous effect on the way that many people see the world. I mean, there's a very, very large Catholic population near where I live, and I was raised Roman Catholic, so and I thought this Pope was just a great guy. I mean, to me he was somebody who embodied many of those things I was just talking about. So I think that that idea that there is something that is going away and something new that is going to come out of that is at the core of the book, not just in terms of institutions, but also in terms of how we ourselves live in the world, that there are times that we die to an old self, and we think, at that point, if we're going through it for the first time, what am I going to do? How will I ever go on? And then you realize that you do go on. You find some method of putting your life back together again in some form or fashion. So I hadn't realized we would go off on such a religious tangent, but this is 2 days ago was Easter. The whole message of Easter is death and rebirth, and so the book treats that on at least a couple of different levels. One is the cultural level of death and rebirth. We're nearing the end of one way of doing things, and still that's where the wilderness part of the title comes in, that we're kind of in the wilderness trying to figure out what the next move is going to be. And that's mirrored in our own personal lives. If we look into our own lives, we will find those moments as well, that there are moments when we die to an old self and have to be born into a new self in order to continue on. And so I guess in the end, I would hope people take hope out of that this is, that there's that even when these things appear to be insolvable, we somehow do manage to find a way to solve them.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, and what about upcoming projects? You talked about Weight of Snow. Is that also the same type of book, different, and anything in between, if there is any?
Well, I'm working on a couple of things right now. I'm working. You and I had talked a little bit about this at the beginning. I'm working on a long series of Substack posts that I hope to be able to turn into some sort of a longer work, perhaps a book, about the effects of social media and how that eats into our creativity and our sense of flow. And both of those things, I believe, are spiritual impulses. So I think that there's a part of social media that is hijacking what could very well be, our spiritual lives. We can't do without social media. You and I are showing that right now. This is I believe, a good purpose of social media, to get a message out, not to divide people, not to try to sell people something, and none of those things, but to talk and to relate ideas. That's a wonderful use of social media. So there's that, and then I have I'm working on a fiction piece right now, or a fiction which is in the very beginning stages of right now, but it deals with memory and how our memory over time starts to take on or starts to change under the weight of circumstances. That's the idea of the weight of snow. How snow, I live in a very cold part of the United States, and snow over the course of winter, you might start out with a storm that's only 6 inches, and then you get that storm that comes in at another 6 inches. So it keeps adding and adding and adding. So what do we remember that is accurate? What do we remember that is made up? So I'm going to deal with a fellow who is having a problem trying to figure that out. And so that's, and I'll keep you posted on that. I'm working on that right now. So, yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely. We'll talk about that also when the book comes out, and also maybe very soon on the Substack posts that you do, which can be very useful to a lot
Sure.
of people. There's so much to learn from you, John, and I'm sure a lot of people would want to learn more about you from you. Also, get hold of your book. What is the best way for them to do so?
They can go to Amazon. I'm these days trying to, or if you have a local bookstore, that would be the best place to. We have a great little bookstore in the little town I live in with a fellow who is a real a lover of books and just a real kind of a real funny guy who runs a great bookstore. And it's always a pleasure to go in there. I love going into bookstores. I just love the smell and just the smell of new books and just being able to see all those, all the great ideas that are there. But if you don't have a bookstore near you, you can go to Amazon for that. You can find me on Substack under John Hamilton. I have the crazy title of Dance Steps for the Apocalypse as my Substack title, because I'm dealing a lot with things that are, and the word apocalypse here, I don't mean that the world is ending. The original meaning of the word apocalypse means an unveiling, so that we actually see what is going on. So this is not an apocalyptical thing with zombies running around. This is all about, now we're getting to see what social media is really all about, and how do we handle that responsibly, carefully, so that we can engage in conversations like we're having right now. So that's what I'm working on right now.
Wonderful. With this, it's a wrap on this very special edition of the Author's Voice with KAJ. Thank you so much indeed for joining us.
Oh, thank you so much. It's always great talking to you. Always great.